The results are not all in, and it is still on a knife edge. But it looks tonight as if Nicola Sturgeon will be able to assemble a majority for another referendum on Scottish independence. If so, she told us tonight she would not need the Prime Minister's permission.
If he wanted to stop that, it would be the case that he would have to go to the Supreme Court to challenge it, and that would be his decision, not mine.
It was tough talk, all right, and suggests that we are about to enter a period of major constitutional contention. Also on News at 10 tonight, Sir Keir Starmer under fire as Labour takes a hammering from the Conservatives in England.
I think that it's a mandate for us to continue to deliver.
We've bitterly disappointing results last night. This goes way beyond a reshuffle, goes way beyond personalities. It goes to the core issue of whether the Labour Party is talking to itself or talking to the country.
In other news now, the under-40s will be offered an alternative to the AstraZeneca vaccine. Residents were looked down upon and ignored and lives put at risk. The shocking independent report on the terrible housing conditions we uncovered in Croydon, and holidays on hold. The green list for travel is published with hardly any countries on it.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby in Edinburgh.
Good evening from Edinburgh, a city Nicola Sturgeon has long dreamed would one day be the capital of an independent Scotland. Well, tonight she is inching closer to making that a reality. It looks as if she will be able to assemble a majority for another referendum with the support of the Greens. And if a vote passes in the Scottish Parliament here, she told us tonight, she will go ahead with it, daring the Prime Minister in London explicitly to try and stop her in the Supreme Court. Boris Johnson himself was all smiles today as the Conservatives won the Hartlepool by-election and made big gains on local councils. But it is events here in Scotland which are of far greater consequence. The SNP's chances of its own majority at Holyrood are on a knife edge, but a pro-independence alliance seems much more certain. And Nicola Sturgeon says that is all the mandate she needs for another referendum which would decide the future of the Union.
An SNP ovation for Nicola Sturgeon on arrival because they believe Scotland is ready to leave the UK. Even if the SNP falls short of a majority, they will be propped up by the Greens, who also want independence. Nicola Sturgeon told me that is still enough. Scotland will have another referendum in the next 5 years, and she is already daring the Prime Minister to try and stop her.
We would proceed with the legislation that is necessary, and that would only happen if it was passed by the Scottish Parliament. And then if he wanted to stop that, it would be the case that he would have to go to the Supreme Court to challenge it.
Isn't it the case that an SNP majority would immeasurably strengthen your hand in those negotiations?
I would like to have an SNP majority, don't get me wrong.
Would you feel more confident of getting a referendum?
If there is a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament, that is the mandate that is needed for there to be an independence referendum.
Angus Robertson, Scottish National Party, 16,276.
From results in so far, the SNP is not on course to win a majority themselves. They needed to gain at least 6 key constituency seats, but as of tonight, they have only managed 3. Dumbarton was the closest marginal seat in Scotland, but Labour's Deputy Leader Jackie Baillie held off the SNP with an even bigger majority.
You want a recovery, not a referendum. You want us to prioritise your jobs, the economy, the NHS. You want us to make sure that our kids at school have all the opportunities they deserve. I pledge to you that I will do that in this next Parliament. Thank you very much. 6 in a row.
But after a dark night for Labour in England, the party's new leader in Scotland had a word of advice for Keir Starmer.
I think there are lessons that the UK Labour Party can learn from the Scottish Labour Party. We obviously had the huge challenge about a binary constitutional choice that divided Scotland.
Is Keir Starmer an asset to your party?
Absolutely, but he still needs more time to be able to establish himself and continue that journey.
Scottish Conservatives campaigned on one clear message: to stop a second independence referendum. and they have now stopped the SNP in 2 key targets.
You should expect the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, who has campaigned for the last 6 weeks and since I became leader in August of last year against a second independence referendum, and what we've seen across the country is some tactical voting to try and keep the SNP out.
There is no doubt the SNP is still winning this election and winning big, but their chances of a majority are now slim, reliant on securing top-up seats from the regional lists tomorrow. But majority or not, Nicola Sturgeon will likely be Scotland's next First Minister, supported by the Greens, and the next Scottish Parliament will be dominated by one question. Is the UK government going to be able to stop another independence referendum? Peter Smith, News at 10, Glasgow.
Well, there are still more results due in across Scotland tomorrow, but let's just take a quick look at how things stand tonight. 48 of the 129 seats have declared today, with the rest due tomorrow. The SNP with 39 are up 3, the Lib Dems have held on to 4, Conservatives with 3 seats are down 2, and Labour with 2 are down 1. And let's get some more now on how things are developing from Peter, who is in Glasgow. Peter, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, very quickly out of the gate on this. I mean, she doesn't even know she's got a majority for an independence referendum yet, but she's come straight out and very tough talking to you tonight, I thought.
Absolutely, Tom, and this is why, because she sees this decision about the future of Scotland, it being in the hands of the Scottish people and ultimately the Scottish Parliament. So after this election, there's really no legal or constitutional difference between an SNP outright majority or a pro-independence majority, with the SNP propped up by the Greens. The power to grant what we call a Section 30, essentially the permission for Scotland to have an independence referendum, still lies in the hands of the UK government. At the moment, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is saying no. He's repeated that message to the Daily Telegraph today. He is saying no. So when Nicola Sturgeon emerges from this election, her plan is to plough on regardless. She will, plan A, ask for permission. When he says no, she's going to say, well, Scotland decides this. And she's daring the UK Prime Minister to try and stop her, taking it to the courts if he must. Now, I'm speaking to some of her senior advisers today. They're saying that if the courts rule against her, they would accept that. They would say, yes, the power lies in the hands of the UK government. But if the court rules in their favour, there's very, very little that Boris Johnson could do to stop Scotland having it safe for its future. So in this election, Tom, the people of Scotland have had their say, but what happens next could be decided in the courts. This isn't happening anytime soon. Nicola Sturgeon's clear it's after the pandemic, so we're looking at 2-3 years down the line, but we are on course for a collision.
OK, Peter Bennell, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining me once again tonight are our ITV News election analysts. Here with me in Edinburgh is Professor Jane Green from Nuffield College, Oxford, and co-director of the British Election Study. And at his home in North Yorkshire is Professor Colin Rallings, our ITV News election analyst. I'm sure both more than familiar with you all by now. Colin, can I come to you first? How does it, I mean, just looking at what's happened today and what we've seen so far, and maybe just casting forward, as Nicola Sturgeon was doing, to the possibility of that referendum, what is it telling you about the pattern of votes and how things might go?
Well, Tom, there's a saying in politics, as indeed in other aspects of life, don't ask a question unless you know what the answer's going to be. And both Alex Salmond in 2014 and David Cameron in 2016 asked a question of the electorate and they got the answer that they didn't want. And Nicola Sturgeon, it's always been assumed, would want a solid pro-independence majority in the polls, not simply at an election, something like 55-45 in favour of independence, going on for some months before she would feel confident in calling that referendum. And things have got more complicated since 2014 because of Brexit, of course, because there are now questions about the relationship of an independent Scotland with the rest of the UK, questions of tariff barriers, what's been happening in Northern Ireland, the EU itself. The EU are very unkeen on letting Catalonia become an independent part away from Spain. There may be similar considerations with Scotland and the United Kingdom. So I think it's not easy, even if she has that pro-independence majority, not a majority of her own, but a pro-independence majority in Holyrood.
OK, Colin, for now, thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to you in a moment to talk about England. Jane, can I put that to you? I mean, Colin essentially saying there, she's, you know, it's tight. it looks tight, but she doesn't have a solid pro-independence majority. What does she need to do you think, to get this over the line for her supporters?
So it seems to me today, Tom, that the results are really showing this kind of solid independence block of votes and this solid pro-union block of votes. And that's very similar to what we've seen since 2014. We've seen this kind of real polarisation in Scotland. And so it's very unlikely that Nicola Sturgeon can persuade hard, dyed-in-the-wool independent supporters, you know, that they're not going to be persuaded any further, but she's very unlikely to persuade very strong pro-union voters to her cause. So she has to go for the people in the middle, and she has to convince them around the costs and the benefits, and also allay the fears and the risks of an independent Scotland as a member of the European Union, potentially. And that hangs on her ability to govern well as in the SNP in government. It hangs on what the UK government does, the spending arrangements, whether or not she can convince those voters that it's disadvantageous what the UK is able to provide to Scotland and how Boris Johnson responds to that. And as Colin was saying, there's that massive question, and it really is a big question, of an independent Scotland as a member of the European Union. And as Colin says, public opinion really has to shift decisively in a pro-independence way for that to become conceivable and risk-free for Nicola Sturgeon.
OK, let's come and talk about England in a moment. But Scotland aside, the elections dubbed Super Thursday have given Boris a fantastic Friday. Across England, the Tories have picked up council seats, but it was Hartlepool's by-election which delivered the most significant result. It's a seat Labour has held, of course, since its creation in 1974, and Keir Starmer was desperate to hold on to. In the end, though, it wasn't even close, as another brick of the so-called Red Wall was painted blue.
All pumped up, both the balloon Boris Johnson and the real thing, after the Tories' historic victory in the Hartlepool by-election and their gains in council votes all over England.
It's a mandate for us to continue to deliver, for not just for the people of Hartlepool, not just for the people of the North East, but across the whole of the country.
Sir Keir Starmer took Labour's helm after his party's 2019 general election flop, its worst since 1935. He hasn't stopped the rot.
We have lost 4 general elections in a row. We've had bitterly disappointing results last night. This goes way beyond a reshuffle, goes way beyond personalities. It goes to the core issue of whether the Labour Party is talking to itself or talking to the country.
Jill Mortimer is duly elected. Congratulations, Jill.
It was just after 7 this morning when Hartlepool fell to the Conservatives, with their share of the vote rising almost a quarter and Labour's dropping 9%. Voters who backed the Brexit Party last time went for Boris Johnson's party.
I'm immensely proud to be the first Conservative MP in Hartlepool for 57 years.
Happy Tories in Northumberland, where they took control of the council. Sad Labour in Dudley, where the Conservatives took an extra 12 seats. And in Harlow, the Blues were cheering and Labour was miserable.
We've lost too many caring and compassionate councillors who've worked so hard for their communities. But I'm afraid we've been overwhelmed by national events.
Not so much disappointment from one of Labour's left-wing trade union paymasters as an "I told you so."
All of our people are telling us, well, what are we voting for? What does Labour stand for? And that's really the issue that Keir himself has to come to terms with.
Is Len McCluskey right about why Keir Starmer didn't impress? We asked Midlands voters.
He's like a piece of wood, I think. Cardboard cutout is awful.
I just think them so far removed from the working class and the aspirations of the working class.
Lost faith in local politicians, as well as the ones in the Westminster.
Houchen, Ben, the Conservative Party candidate, 121,964.
The re-elected Tory mayor with 3 times Labour's vote in a mayoral contest that Labour thought till recently it had a chance to win. Houchen knew who to thank.
I think we need to acknowledge personally Boris Johnson, who's given me a lot of personal support. And this government has done a huge amount for Teesside. It absolutely needs to do more, Boris. So if you're listening, I'll be knocking on your door.
The measure of the Tories' lead in Hartlepool and much of England. He's enjoying it, and although he'll know that in politics the end is always failure, his lead over Labour means that end is probably years away. Robert Peston, News at 10.
So, clearly a difficult day for Labour across England. Here's how things stand tonight with the results so far. More results are, of course, expected tomorrow. The Conservatives are the biggest winner with 1,153, up 160. Labour are down 173. The Lib Dems are also down, and the Greens are up. Those results mean the Conservatives have control of 31 councils, up 8. Labour have 32, down 4, with 12 under no overall control. And then there is that significant by-election in Hartlepool, where the Conservatives won the seat from Labour, polling more than 50% of the vote. And that really is a remarkable result. It's not that long since Labour's Peter Mandelson commanded a majority of 17,500 there. Well, today he said the defeat boiled down to the two C's, COVID and Corbyn. But across the country there are perhaps two B's which are just as important, Boris Johnson and Brexit. They drew voters away from Labour in 2019 that simply have not come back. So what needs to change for Labour to regain a foothold in its former heartlands?
A new dawn for Labour, but not one they'd ever dreamed of. Rejected in a seat that had been red for more than half a century. Their candidate's anti-Brexit stance in a Brexit voting town seen by some as tone deaf.
Morning, Rich, how we doing?
Ian Corley runs a food bank and has always voted Labour, but says they'd lost touch.
We didn't listen. The party didn't listen. And, you know, I think that's part of it. We seem to be representing a view of a minority when we should be listening to the majority.
A decade of cuts to local services has increased the sense that Hartlepool has been forgotten. But Tory austerity is not seen as the main culprit. Frustrated at inactivity by a Labour-dominated council, Bonnie Pinder set up her own shop for children with learning disabilities.
I understand you have to make cutbacks in certain areas, but certain services have really been lacking funding here, and it's very much needed in this town, definitely.
And people blame Labour for that?
I think so.
But quite why so many people have taken the plunge and switched to the Conservatives also seems to be down to their promises on more investment. Promises that Boris Johnson insisted today he'd keep.
Prime Minister, you've offered a lot of money and jobs to this area. Are you going to deliver on that, or are they just likely to be as empty as that blimp over there?
Well, we're working very hard, Libby, for the people of the whole country. Many, many jobs we hope that will come into the Freeport, and you must hold us to it.
On the beach nearby, his appeal as Tory leader appears to have shored up the Tory vote.
What do you think of Boris Johnson?
I mean, he divides opinion, doesn't he? But he's clearly doing something. And he's probably more of a northeast type of person. You can relate to him a little bit better than you can anybody.
The race here wasn't even close, admits one former MP.
What the Labour Party has to do today in the light of this shattering result is appreciate, the scale of the challenge and of the transformation that is needed.
Plenty to reflect on after a defeat that Labour won't soon forget. Libby Vina, News at 10, Hartlepool.
If Labour was searching for a bright spot on a dark night, they could do a lot worse than to look to Wales. There, the party has at least held its ground, seeing off the challenge from the Conservatives in some of their top target seats in the Senedd election. ITV Wales' political editor, Adrian Masters, is in Cardiff tonight. Adrian, good evening to you. In the round, a pretty good day for Labour there.
It's looking even better as well, Tom, because the story here in Wales is different. It's not a story of Labour disaster and Conservative success. It is a story of Labour victory, a clear victory for Mark Drakeford, the leader of Welsh Labour, and his cautious approach to the COVID pandemic. We're just now awaiting to see the scale of the victory, because there is even the possibility, when the regional seats start coming in, that Labour could reach a majority in the Senedd, in the Welsh Parliament. That's never happened since the Welsh Parliament was first set up well over 20 years ago. We are still waiting for those regional votes, and the Conservatives will be looking to some of those. They're already starting to pick up some of those. For the Conservatives, this was actually objectively quite a good result. They have gained seats, they've increased their vote share, but they are talking about it as a clear disappointment. And why? Because Wales has a version of those red wall seats that you've been talking about, and the Conservatives have failed to take those, all apart from one. There's also bad news for the Welsh nationalists, Plaid Cymru, and we'll be waiting to see whether any of the smaller parties will have picked up some seats. But in a twist on that old political joke, Tom, for Wales, don't see England.
OK, Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's bring some of that back to Jane here, if I might. We're a long way off from the next general election, let's be honest. I know these things come around faster than we both think, but nevertheless, it's way off. What do you think the Labour Party, we talked a little bit last night what the problems might be. What do you think they have to do to close the gap and give themselves a chance of winning?
I mean, this is the question that nobody's had an answer for the last year and a half.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a bit tricky, yeah.
No, but I think it's absolutely fascinating. What we've seen in Wales is that it is possible for Labour to get back some of its Leave voters in some of those Leave voting areas. And that's a fascinating result that's starting to become clear in Wales. So, if I were on the spot, as you put me,
yes.
I think,
That's why you're here, Jane, I'm sorry.
Clearly, Labour has to hold on to these graduate voters and these younger voters, the voters in the cities. I mean, they have to build from the vote that they already have.
Yeah.
But I think what Labour needs to do is to move back onto the economic dimension. I mean, move back onto economics and probably tell the story about the same old Tories. The same old Tories who maybe mishandled the COVID crisis, the Brexit deal that hasn't worked in various different ways as may become manifest over time. And also the Conservatives have promised to level up the country. Now, it would be possible for Labour to point to where that hasn't happened and to reconnect, I think, with those working class voters and those working class parts of the country. Now, a lot has to happen for that to be easy for a Labour leader to do, and I think part of that is waiting for the hard times to fall on the incumbent Conservative government, as eventually, inevitably happens.
OK, Jane, thank you very much indeed. Well, Colin, can I just come in this bell finally to you? I mean, we've covered so many of these things, discussed so many of these things over the years. What, in the end, do you read into what you've seen today?
Well, I think what it shows us is how much of a parlous situation Labour is currently in. This is probably one of their worst performances in a set of local elections when they've been in opposition. They've got a huge long way to get back. It looks almost impossible for them to win a general election in one hit. They've never really won general elections before without having a solid base of support in Scotland, which doesn't seem to be coming back anytime soon. And of course now, today has underlined throughout the North East all those places that were considered Labour seats in the column before people had even gone to the polls. They haven't got those either. So as Jane was rather implying, they've got to go and look for some other voters. They've got to appeal to different segments of the community. And of course, yes, they've done well in Wales, as Adrian was saying. And look, tomorrow, we'll find they've actually done quite well in London as well. So not everyone is rejecting Labour, but they've got to make a much more focused view on where their appeal is and how they can best get those people to the polls to support them again.
OK, Colin, thank you very much. And Jane here till the next time. But for now, thank you. Well, it has been quite a day for politicians across the UK. So who better to sum up than Robert, who is in Downing Street. Robert, can I just talk about Scotland first? As we were discussing with Peter at the start, Nicola Sturgeon very quickly out of the gate. Do you think it's realistically plausible for the Prime Minister to turn down the option of a referendum if she gets a majority for it here?
Well, as you know, the question of whether the SNP gets an outright majority is on a knife edge, but it looks very likely that with the Greens there will be pro-independence parties in the Scottish Parliament, and I think if the Scottish Parliament were to vote for a referendum, I think it is impossible for the incumbent of this place, Boris Johnson, to just say no, nay, never. In fact, his language has shifted, Tom, in the last couple of days, because his most recent pronouncements were that this is not the time for a referendum until we're through COVID. It's very similar to what, frankly, Nicola Sturgeon has been saying. Nobody expects a referendum really before the end of 2023, which is what Nicola Sturgeon said was her likely timetable when she was on my show recently. There's a lot of politics to come between now and then. But no, he won't be able to resist it if there is a majority in the Scottish Parliament.
And Labour in England, what do you make of the results today?
Awful for Keir Starmer. They are worse in many ways in England than the party suffered in the 2019 general election, and Keir Starmer was elected to stop the rot. You will have seen part of his comments to camera today, and what he talks about is the need for change, the need to connect with voters. It just hasn't worked out yet how to do that. Talking to his senior colleagues, the thing that everybody says is that he's got to come up with a vision for Britain. And curiously, some would say the best way to do that is to look across the Atlantic at the way that Joe Biden is connecting with America. He's announced a multi-trillion-dollar program all about creating jobs. If the Labour Party isn't about creating jobs, it's probably about nothing. So I assume that's where Keir Starmer will end up. Does it mean he's on a path to win the next election? It would be a brave person who would forecast that at this juncture.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Now, the Conservatives have unquestionably benefited in these elections from the successful vaccine rollout. If there's been one bump in the road, it's the extremely rare blood clots linked to the AstraZeneca jab. With younger people more at risk, it was decided a month ago that the under 30s should be offered an alternative. Today, that was raised to include under 40s. Scientists said it's to improve confidence. The fear is it could do the opposite.
At this clinic in East London, they've got someone booked to receive their AstraZeneca vaccine every 2.5 minutes. Right now, the vaccine is going to anyone over 40. But from now on, to help avoid the risk of rare blood clots associated with the jab, anyone younger than that will be offered an alternative.
The balance of benefits and risks of the vaccine is very favourable for older age groups, but it is more finely balanced for younger people.
Out of 28.5 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine given, there have been 242 blood clotting events, 49 of which have been fatal. But the risk increases in younger age groups, from about 1 in 100,000 for 40 to 49-year-olds to 1 in 60,000 for those 30 to 39. However, today's decision is not so much about the risk of the vaccine, but the decreasing risk of COVID overall, and the fact alternative jabs are available, meaning the change can be made without risking a surge in cases. Nicola Dean, who's 40, had her AstraZeneca vaccine on Saturday. Her husband Gareth, 39, would have been happy to have it too.
For me, looking at what was happening in India at the same time, it just got rid of any concern.
Yeah, I think if it delays things, it will be frustrating. But I mean, I'm keen to get it as soon as possible.
Officials say they're confident the change won't affect the end of July target for all adults getting a first dose. And while low COVID rates gives us wiggle room, today's data on a doubling of cases of the India variant, predominantly in London and the northwest, is a reminder of why we can't be complacent.
So those areas, we really do want people to be extra cautious. Now, what we have with this particular Indian variant at the moment is that we found yesterday at the technical group, the variant technical group, that the transmissibility was at least equal to what we've been calling the Kent variant. We don't yet know many other characteristics about it.
Early signs are that the India variant will be more susceptible to our vaccines than other concerning variants like the South Africa strain. All the more reason to keep the vaccine rollout on track. Tom Clark, News at 10.
It was clear when we filmed inside a block of council flats in Croydon with thick mould and leaking ceilings, creating an inhospitable environment, that something had gone seriously wrong, very seriously wrong. Well, today an independent report identified a series of council failings, among them incompetence and a lack of care for residents who were looked down upon and ignored, putting lives at risk. The result was the dreadful conditions we discovered.
They were described as the worst homes in Britain. The damp, dangerous disrepair ITV News found in these flats in South London, putting the lives of residents at risk. That's the conclusion of a damning inquiry which found the landlord, Croydon Council, incompetent, uncaring and chronically short-staffed, with a poor culture that stigmatised tenants and ignored them for 4 years, leading to this.
I just feel like I'm going to kill myself if I continue like that, so...
Franzoy was left to live in it with her 2 young sons. Now in her new home, she says those responsible should lose their jobs.
You can't just treat people like that and do that to another human being and expect to get away with it.
Do you worry they are going to get away with it, as you put it?
They are going to get away with it because who's going to hold them accountable?
The report, commissioned following our investigation, found a lack of capacity and competence at Croydon Council. Tenants stigmatised by staff as demanding, difficult and less worthy of respect. Senior managers do not appear to know what is going on and failed in their duty to keep tenants safe. Today, Croydon Council accepted the findings of the report in full.
Clearly what happened, which the investigators have observed for us, was unacceptable. And it's shocking that our council residents came to you to present those cases to us rather than coming to us. That shows the change we've got.
They did come to you.
Indeed. We ignore them. Yes, absolutely. And that's what I want to change.
We've seen no sign of anyone being sacked, anyone losing their jobs. The fact is no one's taking responsibility in your council for what's happened here.
I don't accept that at all. As council leader, I have commissioned this report. We have a clear action plan about how we're going to respond to all of those recommendations.
Mushroom comes from it. What, in the wall?
But it's still happening in Croydon today. Constant leaks in Riziki's kitchen have caused this.
We remove this all the time. This is a mushroom. These are mushrooms.
Riziki lives here with his wife and children opposite Franzoy's former block and has complained to the council about water damage and damp for 2 years.
We pay for this. I told them, I pay. Shh. Can you help? We need the help. I have a key in the house. Okay.
Croydon Council told us the necessary repairs have now been booked in here, but admitted tonight they still don't know how many others are living in conditions like this. Daniel Hewitt, News at 10, Croydon.
Mushrooms in the kitchen, you couldn't make it up. Now, anyone waiting with bated breath to find out where they can go on holiday may have been disappointed today. The list of countries given the green light from May the 17th was short and not all that sweet. Passengers have also been told to expect delays at the border, while Manchester City and Chelsea fans were warned not to travel to the Champions League final in Turkey after it was placed on the red list.
Portugal today, and at last beaches like this are within reach for millions. After months of uncertainty, tonight government announced details of a cautious return to international leisure travel from England.
Today's announcement, removing the stay in the UK restrictions from the 17th of May, is necessarily cautious. We must make absolutely sure that the countries we reconnect with are safe.
So-called green list destinations mean travellers won't need to quarantine on return, including Portugal with Madeira and the Azores, Singapore, Iceland, Gibraltar and Israel. On the amber list, requiring up to 10 days quarantine when you get back, includes Spain, USA, France, Greece. And now on the red list, requiring a 10-day stay in a managed quarantine hotel, includes the Maldives and Turkey, a blow for football fans hoping to attend the Champions League final in Istanbul.
At last, foreign holidays are back, but with some big changes. Right now, there'll be less choice and much more complexity. As for prices, there are already signs that some are rising.
Many in this industry say the reopening of travel is too cautious, and today others demanded government action to solve border control congestion.
To ensure that the process at the borders, the checks at the borders are simple, are efficient, and the process for passengers is smooth and safe.
Our own traffic light system. Julie Morse watched today's travel announcement, having booked for Greece. It's not on the green list, but she's hoping that could change before peak summer.
If they're going to look at it every 3 weeks, and hopefully it might get back on the list, but it's not looking good. We had to cancel last year as well, so it's just a bit of a shame really. We'll probably be sitting in the back garden for the summer holidays if it gets any warmer.
It's what millions have longed for. There are warnings to check for adequate refund policies, but tonight a clutch of destinations finally seem a lot closer. Chris Choi, News at 10.
So that is just about it from us tonight on a day of high political drama across the UK. Here in Scotland, the results have perhaps not been quite as decisive as Nicola Sturgeon would have liked so far, but with the pro-independence movement she has championed, all but certain to hold a majority at Holyrood, calls for another referendum can only grow louder. And the next great political battle of our times will surely be over whether or not the people of Scotland will once again be asked to decide its future, be that inside or outside the United Kingdom. Good night, see you tomorrow. Thank you for watching.